Welcome today on how to build gender inclusive digital economies. As I mentioned earlier, I'm Nandini Harihareswara, one of your facilitators. I work for the UN Capital Development Fund, and I'm based in Bangalore, India. Today's agenda is a full agenda, and we wanted in the 90 minutes that we have with you to try to share with you an overview on how we've built a playbook, a guide to help practitioners in the field to think about building inclusive digital economies with a gender lens and being gender intentional. So we have a full agenda. We've got an introduction where we'll introduce ourselves and allow the participants to introduce themselves. We'll introduce the playbook. We'll do a Q&A with an interactive session. We'll have a vote where you guys can help us understand which barriers are most relevant to women's digital and financial inclusion in your countries or regions. Then we'll talk about the most common market constraints in diagnostics and research, and then the most common constraints for women's digital and financial skills. And in each of these sessions, we'll talk about what are the kinds of interventions that we've researched that one can try individually or mutually to try to address those market constraints. Then we'll try to have another Q&A and interactive session, breaking it up a little bit. Then we'll talk a little bit about market constraints with respect to infrastructure. And then we'll talk about market constraints with respect to innovation and policy and regulation. We'll close with a Q&A and interactive session and then have a very brief close, which I know seems like a lot, but we wanted to pack a lot in 90 minutes for everyone to enjoy. So I've introduced myself. Giulia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Nandini. I am Giulia Zaratti. I'm very, very happy to be here. Good morning and good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I am Italian, but currently based in the US, in Massachusetts, and I am working with Nandini on at UNCDF on women's economic empowerment and financial inclusion, especially how to empower women in the digital economy.
Wonderful. I know we're already a very tight agenda, but Giulia and I thought, since it's a small group of people, if you don't mind, in your name, you can click on more and edit your name. You can put the organization that you're part of and the country you represent. And we could do a very, very fast introductions of everyone where they can just say their name and the organization and country that they're from, just so we have a sense of the people that are in our group today, in our knowledge event today. Maybe I'll just start choosing people from alphabetical order who are not hosting this event. So Bernadette, would you like to start?
Hi, everybody. I'm sorry I am unable to turn the camera on. My name is Bernadette Sáho. I am originally from Hungary. And sorry, what else did you say I should?
What organization? Just name, organization, country. That's all.
Yes, Symbiosis Center for European Studies from India.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us. Fernanda, would you like to go next?
Sure. My name is Fernanda Bassetti-Matos. I work for the Employment Policy Department of the International Labour Organization, and I'm based in Geneva.
You're based in?
Geneva.
Geneva. Welcome. Nice to have you. Names keep on moving, but Francesca.
Hi. I'm from ADB as a consultant, and I'm from the Philippines.
Great. Irene.
Hi, I'm Irene Lavinia. I'm an independent consultant based between Manila and Vienna, and I've consulted for ADB at some point.
Great. Hi, welcome. It's starting to be moving quite a bit. So Julie McDonald.
Hello there, I am Julie MacDonald. I am the Regional Gender Advisor for United Nations World Food Programme, Asia Pacific. Normally based in Bangkok, currently working remotely from my home in Auckland, New Zealand. Thank you.
Welcome. Iram Hashimi.
Hi, I am a research degree student at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. I'm doing my thesis in gender-based violence and generally interested in knowing more about gender equality, and hence here I am.
Welcome. Madeline.
Hi everyone, my name is Madeline Dasky and I work on women in the Pacific Private Sector Development Initiative, which is based out of the IDE in the Sydney office in Australia.
Welcome. Nang.
Hi, this is Nang from How She Did It. I'm based in Myanmar with a startup that try to rescale and upscale women and girls for digital economy.
Welcome.
Thanks for having
Priscilla. Priscilla from the Philippines.
Hello, I'm with the Department of Justice, Parole and Probation Administration, Philippines.
Welcome. Saudat, if I pronounced that correctly.
Yeah, right pronunciation. Yeah, hi. My name is Saudat. I am from Tajikistan and I'm a consultant for FAO UN.
Welcome. Wairimu?
Sorry?
Welcome. I'm calling the next person now. Wairimu?
Yes. Hello, my name is Wairimu Gitahi. I'm a consultant and I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya.
Welcome, Wairimu. I'm sure I skipped a few people and people joined right as people were introducing themselves. If anyone would like to take the last 30 seconds and introduce themselves, please go ahead, and then we're going to jump into the session. No? Okay, great. I'm going to go back to sharing screen. So the first thing we have, and Julia, if you don't mind putting the link in the interactive discussion, we would like all of you to just think for yourselves, what challenges do women in your immediate social circle? So many of you, it sounds like already work in this space, have an interest in this space, that's great. We just wanted to make this personal for maybe some people who don't necessarily work in this space. So what challenges do women in your immediate social circle or family face in the digital economy now and today? So I'm going to start the vote just now. Give me 1 second. Okay. You got it. So Giulia, you put it in.
Yes, it's in the link. It's in the chat. So everybody, let me know if you don't see it, and I'll send you a private message if you don't see it. Just write me privately in case.
Wonderful, thank you. And I'm also sharing too. This is the question. You should be able to vote. Let us know if you're having any trouble voting. You put it in this in the chat, either in the general chat. Okay, confidence, jobs. What other challenges do you see? If you're having any trouble with the word cloud, please let us know. Access to quality gadgets, don't know how to use it. Balance, that's something I definitely have challenges with. Giulia, do you see anything on here that surprises you?
It's interesting to read the access to quality gadgets. If the person who wrote it wants to tell us more on that, I guess it's interesting for us.
That's definitely something we'll talk about later as well. Yes, please go ahead.
Sorry, that was from me. So I'm from the Philippines, where really lack of internet or lack of access to high quality gadgets is very, it's a problem for us.
That's it, the core of our presentation, basically.
Okay, wonderful. So we just wanted to start everybody out with something a little bit, personal, so we could, get everyone's thoughts on what that looked like for us. So as I mentioned in our presentation, we have 5 sections that we'll be quickly going over with you. And so what we wanted to do is actually first get your vote on which barriers are relevant for each of those sections. So I'm gonna initiate the vote for that section on specifically on diagnostics and research. So what is the market data and research constraint? And I'm going to share a screen shortly. But this should be popping up in the same link that's in the screen, that's in the chat for you. What is the market data and research constraint for women's digital and financial inclusion that's most relevant to you and your markets? So if you think about one country or one region that you manage, or even area that you work, is there something, which part of market data and research is most relevant to you and your market? And this will make sense later on, but we're asking just to save time for everyone to vote now on what that looks like for you. So when you take the vote, it gives you 5 different options. It talks about demand side research, it talks about supply side research, it talks about research on the regulatory space. So take a look, read through the options, and please make a vote. Okay, we've got 1 vote for social and cultural norms agency. We've got 1 focused on using data for improving outcomes. We only have 2 votes. I think we have 20 people in the room, so please go ahead and yeah, Francesca wants to select all 5. That will be your challenge, Francesca, for the, many of these. You will want to select all of them, but we're trying to get an area of focus from all of you to direct us. So this training will be useful to everyone, but we're getting a tied score on all of these. So we really need everyone to try to vote. If you can, it will help us. Please do click on the link and vote for what you think is the most relevant constraint. If you have any questions on what something means, please let us know. Right now we have 8 people that have voted. I think we'll close the voting for this in maybe 30 seconds. Yeah, Giulia? Because we got to move on to the next one.
Exactly.
So demand side does seem to be winning, Giulia. Let's make a note of that. So when we're presenting on data and research, we know to focus on demand side data a little bit. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. Okay, the next section is going to be focused on skills. So what are the major barriers to skills for women? My computer takes its time.
I just share another link in the chat for everyone. Here we will have the next 2 questions, so please use the new link.
Yes, please use the new link and go ahead and vote. So what is, and I will share screen. what is the major constraint for women's skills in digital and financial inclusion that's most relevant to you, that you think is most relevant for your work or your market? The first one is focused on financial capability, literacy, numeracy. The second one is focused on digital literacy. The third one is focused on market information for women's entrepreneurship. The fourth is low levels of entrepreneurship skills. And the last is focused on that agency piece. Women and girls lack the skills, knowledge, confidence to access information and engage in public-private dialogue. So we've had 3 votes so far. Please go ahead and put your votes in. Again, this will guide us when we're doing our presentations on what market constraint to focus on and which interventions to address that market constraint. We've got more votes for market information and agency. Okay, I think we'll close the vote in about 30 seconds. And move on to the next question, which will be focused on infrastructure, which was one of the things that one of our colleagues from the Philippines just said, talked about phones and access to phones. Okay, we had 12 people vote, thank you. Okay, and we're gonna move on to the next question, which is focused on infrastructure. What's the big challenge for your work or your market? Is it a gender gap in identity documents? Is it a gender gap in levels of mobile phone ownership, including smartphones? Is it the gender gap in internet access? Is it the gender gap in energy access? People don't talk about that very much. Is it the fact that digital services via agent networks sometimes aren't as accessible to women as they are to men? Or lastly, is it that digital payments aren't very women friendly? Is that one of the biggest challenges in your work or in your market? Please go ahead and vote. All 5. I know everybody wants to vote for all 5. And actually, I really appreciate that, because when Giulia and I were working on the playbook, there's a lot of market constraints. We don't cover all of them for every country, right? Because every country is unique. But what we tried to do is say, what are the most common market constraints we're seeing in most of the markets that UNCDF works in? So this will be a useful tool to our colleagues working on the ground as a playbook, right? Okay, we have 9 people that have voted so far, 10. Okay, interesting that digital payments has gotten the most votes so far, 3 votes. That's unusual. Okay, we'll give it another 10 seconds and then we'll close the vote. A lot of close seconds, huh, Giulia? Oh, mobile phone ownership just got to number 1, huh?
Yep.
Okay. Well, with that, we'll move to the last vote. Giulia, you can put the link in. This is about innovation. So what is the constraint on innovation for in your market? Is it digital and financial products are not really built to meet the needs of women? Is it limited access to finance, especially for women-owned or women-led enterprises? Is it poor entrepreneurship skills that are connected to innovation, like use of digital payments, getting on e-commerce platforms, things like that? Or is it that women and girls have poor access to digital business tools, digital platforms? participation in the innovation workforce has gotten the most votes so far. I think that speaks to a lot of the learnings from our COVID times and the rise of e-commerce platforms during those COVID times, I think. I think we've got 8 votes. We will close the voting in about 10 seconds, 15 seconds. Giulia, how are we doing on time?
We are running a bit late, so we need to be already. We haven't started yet.
We took a risk by having everybody introduce themselves, but we thought it would be, since it was a small group, we thought it would be nicer if we all at least knew who was in the room. Great.
We have a clear winner here.
We have a clear winner. Okay, very good. And then this is the last question, and it's focused on policy and regulation. And it looks like some people have already voted. What are the policy and regulation constraints for women's digital and financial inclusion that are most relevant? And there's 6 of them, so it's quite extensive. But you know, there's a lot of importance in this area. I mean, all 5 areas. That's why we kind of selected them. But we have 4 votes so far. But the first is focused on representation. There isn't much representation. The second are that many laws and policies are discriminatory. The third is enabling basic regulatory enablers for digital financial services. The fourth is data and supervision, using requiring and using sex disaggregated data. Implementation, the operationalization of consumer protection, super important, especially to women. And lastly, are government to people payments, are they women friendly? That's one of the biggest levers the government has in many of the countries that we work in. Looks like representation's winning big time. Okay, great. So thank you for the votes. We'll go ahead and go into the presentation. And I've asked Giulia to keep us on time, although I know we're already a little bit late, so we'll try to go quickly. So UNCDF is the UN Capital Development Fund. We are a UN agency that's about 60 years old. Our focus is on bringing last mile financing models that unlock capital for public and private sector for the poorest countries in the world. So we largely work in least developed countries. We partner with public and private sector stakeholders to unlock market constraints. And that's one of the reasons you see that language. What are those market constraints? And build inclusive digital economies that serve the SDGs. Today, we're talking about SDG 5 mainly, gender equality. We have geographical presence in West and East Africa and Southern Africa, in South Asia, East Asia, and the Pacific. Our work streams are these 4 work streams, and this is how we talk about and how we construct our work in partnership with government and private sector and civil society in the countries that we work, according to these 4 work streams: skills, innovation, infrastructure, and policy and regulation. And so that's one of the reasons you'll see our talk today has those 4 areas of focus. Our overall goal is the inclusive digital economy reduces poverty, increases resilience, and improves economic opportunities for all. And then specifically today, we're talking about how that can be done for women. Our approach is focused on making women builders of digital economies, right? Not just beneficiaries, but builders. We have a 5-prong approach that takes an ecosystem approach. First is focused on decreasing the gender digital divide, including ownership and that autonomy or agency issues. It includes phone, internet, and energy, as well as that capability issue that we talked about earlier. Second is solving problems for women with digital and financial products. Third is lowering barriers for women MSMEs via technology. Fourth is increasing women's autonomy via policy incentives and data. And then lastly, we really want to co-create a gender inclusive digital economy, leadership and labor force. So this is our five-pronged approach. So I think many of you hearing the names of the organizations in the audience know that this is one of the biggest problems, right? Money is the domain of men. Society doesn't view it as her role, a woman's role, to earn money or her right to make financial decisions. We know that there is a gender divide in many of the countries that we work with worldwide. They're less likely to be financially included, less likely to own a phone, less likely to own a business, and less likely to have control over household expenses. And so we kind of know that there is still a lot of work to do. In fact, they say, when the World Economic Forum says we have 100+ year gap before we'll see gender equality. We know COVID has had an even more negative push on women and girls and pushing them into poverty and unemployment. So we created 3 cheat sheets just to help people understand what the drivers are to women and girls' digital and financial inclusion. This one talks about, well, what are those higher level drivers, right? Enabling environment, supply side and demand side of digital and financial services. What enables women and girls around access, usage, and agency? And then how does that lead to their economic empowerment? We also recognize that a woman and a girl aren't just one monolith. That's what one of my colleagues, Nisha Singh at CGAP says, right? They have women and girls lead different lives. And then depending on where they are in their life stages, they have different financial and non-financial needs. And so this visual kind of shares a little bit about what this is. And our playbook is available online. So Giulia will put the link of our playbook in the chat as well. And the last cheat sheet is agency and autonomy. So I'll give you a hint that we'll have a little bit of a poll and a quiz on this later on, but we have 2 kinds of elements around what agency, or what we like to call autonomy, looks like, right? There are direct indicators of agency. They are aspects that are fundamental to a woman's ability to make meaningful decisions and act upon them. And there's indirect indicators of agency, right? Downstream outcomes that reflect even agency. And so we usually are very familiar with some of the ones that are direct, right? Household decision-making. Is a woman involved in how money is spent in the household? Power within. So the aspirations, self-efficacy, and attitudes towards gender norms. Freedom from violence, freedom from movement. And then the indirect agencies are family domain of agency. So do they get to choose when they get married, when they have children? The economic domain of agency. So how much do they participate in the labor force? How much do they have control over the money they earn? And lastly is political and community domain of agency. And I have a feeling we'll be talking a little bit about that later, given the voting for the policy and regulatory section. So the first section we talk about is diagnostics and research constraints. These are the 5 common constraints, and you voted on them, right? The first is generally demand side research is not there. Second is supply side, so on the side of financial and digital providers. Third is research around what the challenges are on the enabling environment. Fourth is research on social and cultural norms and agency. And lastly is a lack of use of data and iterative testing for improving outcomes. We'll quickly go through each barrier, but this text is available online as well, and we'll make it available online. So the first barrier is really a lack of demand side research. Demand side is usually individual and household surveys that help us understand what are the challenges for women on the demand side. So often in countries that we work in, there isn't enough information around is there a gender gap on access to identity? Is there a gender gap on access to financial, digital, and energy services? And so while you do have some elements of that data at a global level, like for example, you see the Global Findex and the World Bank's Enterprise Survey. Those are two excellent demand side surveys that we use quite a bit. It's an important element of understanding what the challenges look like for women. The second set are supply side demand, supply side research, usually on the side of financial service providers or digital service providers, on women and girls as customers and on their participation as workers, as managers in the financial and teleco sector, and even as agents. You've heard of digital financial service agents in the wider value chain. The third constraint is a focus on understanding the enabling and regulatory environment strengths and challenges, right? So the famous report that I love, that's kind of a must read, is the Women, Business and Law report that comes out of the World Bank every year, that talks about regulatory data and how enabling the environment looks like. There's also the global microscope coming out of CFI and the Economist Intelligence Unit. So those are important reports that help us better understand what those enabling environment enablers or challenges are. The fourth barrier is focused on social and cultural norms and agency, institutional enablers and constraints. And though I would say this is still a new area for many organizations, CGAP, in partnership with several other organizations, including UNCDF, is actually testing a social and cultural norms diagnostic, which I think they're going to be speaking about on the 24th this week as part of the IDE Gender Week. So I think this is often an area that actually there isn't a lot of research on, even though often cultural and social norms are actually the underlying barriers to some of the other market constraints we'll be talking about today. The fifth set of barriers is a lack of use of data and iterative testing for improving outcomes. So often in a country, you may have some data, but stakeholders don't necessarily know how to use that data to actually improve outcomes. Giulia, do you remember what our group voted on to be the top barrier that we should talk about, what interventions we...
If I correctly remember, they voted on the demand side.
That's what I remember as well.
Yes.
Yeah. So very quickly, just so we can orient you to the playbook, what the playbook has constructed itself to do is we have each of these market constraints, and then through extensive research, what we've done is tried to say, okay, these are good practice with some results and evidence that show they actually can help to address some of these market constraints, depending on what the challenges are in your particular country, region, or environment. So what we'll do today is, just as a little bit of an advertisement, is to show you what it looks like for one particular market constraint. So the one you voted for, the one that many of you felt was quite challenging for you, was demand side research, really understanding either at the individual level or at the household level, what are those challenges, what is that access to all of these different and usage of these different pieces. So if that is a challenge, we have this list of both secondary and primary options, right? So secondary means there's already been data put forward, there's already been surveys done for several countries, or it could be a global survey that you can actually access to better understand some of these numbers for your country. Primary means that it might be a toolkit that allows you to take elements of that toolkit to then create your own survey and do your own primary analysis. And so we have all of these examples of a digital gender gap audit scorecard from the World Wide Web Foundation. We have a toolkit from USAID trying to understand gender and ICT. We at UNCDF have a tool called the Power Diagnostic, participation of the women in the economy realized. So there's several of these that either already have been done and there's already data available, or you yourself can take on that tool and actually use that data after you do your own survey. So one of the things that I think many of our colleagues in the implementation field may or may not know is there is actually a decent amount of sex disaggregated data. It's not always collected every year. That's a challenge when you're trying to see what change looks like, but at least to get some baseline numbers on how a country is doing. There's actually quite a bit of data in many countries, but it doesn't cover every country. So I'm going to hand it over to Giulia very happily to talk a little bit about stream number 2, which was women's skills. Giulia, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Nandini. And also great time management. We are back on track. So now we are focusing on the second stream, which is about women's skills. And here we have 5 different barriers that you can see in the next slides. So basically, the 5 barriers for women's skills are the fact that women do have a low level of financial capability, literacy, numeracy, and education. Then we have a barrier on the low level of financial literacy, low level of market information, low level on entrepreneurship, and then low influence on the government and private sector leadership. So these are the main 5 barriers, and then we can go one by one exploring all of them. Starting with the 5th barrier, which is about low level of financial capability, literacy, numeracy, and education. We can see that financial literacy, we can go on the next slide. Financial literacy, as you probably know, is represented by the fact that women understand and usage various financial skills, including personal financial management, budgeting, and investing. On the other side, financial capability is the combination of attitude, knowledge, skills, self-efficacy needed to make and exercise money management decision. And although women worldwide are more educated than men at any point in history, women are still not as educated as men. And despite there is evidence that demonstrates how central girls' education is to development. And there are still gender disparities at education at all levels. And unfortunately, the reasons behind these are many. For example, some barriers to girls' education includes poverty, child marriage, gender-based violence, and lately the COVID-19 pandemic. Also, poor families favor boys when investing in education, and in some places schools do not meet the safety, hygiene, or sanitation needs of girls. In other places, teaching practice are not gender responsive and results in gender gap in learnings and skill development. Moving on to the second barrier, we have a low level of digital literacy. Not only women have low level of financial capabilities and literacy, but they are also more likely than men than being digitally illiterate. As you can see in the slide, digital literacy is the ability to use both information and communication technologies to find, evaluate, create, and communicate information, and it requires both cognitive and technical skills. Although the gender gap in the use of digital technology has narrowed in recent years, women continue to be at disadvantage worldwide. And digital illiteracy often translates in the lack of comfort in using technologies and accessing the internet. Indeed, the internet, the digital platform, the mobile phones, and the digital financial services can give women the possibility to earn additional income, but also to increase economic opportunities, access knowledge, and general information. So there is a lot of work to do to increase women's digital literacy. And in this case, it's important to note that sociocultural reasons play an important role in analyzing the digital divide. For example, the OECD found that many women believe that the internet is not appropriate for them for a number of cultural reasons. For example, women report not to use internet because of the negative social perception associated to its use, or because of the lack of acceptance by family members. So there are a lot of reasons connected with social norms. Moving on to the third barrier in this work stream, we can unfortunately notice that women have a low level of market information. This is on the next slide, please, Nandini. And if I'm not wrong, this is also the barrier that you selected in the poll. So we will focus a bit more here on the intervention. So women have a low level of market information, and why this is relevant? It is relevant because it limits their participation and competitiveness as entrepreneurs, as well as their access to financial services. And we have done a lot of research in this, and we found that a support network is essential for women when they want to be entrepreneurs. And therefore, it's not surprised that 48% of female funders in the world report that a lack of available advisors and mentors limits their professional growth. And unfortunately, it's a huge problem for women, because social networks facilitate economic activity that encourages the efficiency of entrepreneurs and also increases business opportunities. And network and social connection are more important for women entrepreneurs because women rely more than men on network and challenge for information. Finally, on this barrier, let me share that women networks are more limited in two major ways. The first one, because they contain mostly other women, which limits their interaction. And secondly, the women network are mainly based on relatives and friends rather than being based on colleagues and mentors. Therefore, women-only business network fail to boost female entrepreneurship and instead serve to marginalize further the very people they seek to help. Let me move to the other barrier. The fourth barrier is low level of entrepreneurship. As you can see, there is a huge gender gap in SME ownership worldwide, which stands at 63%. And policymakers worldwide see the drive to increase female entrepreneurship as a key to helping foster both national and regional economic growth. However, women still lag behind in terms of business ownership, growth, and access to resources. And this is the gender gap in entrepreneurship depends on a number of factors. For example, women would often prefer wage employment over self-employment, and women are more likely to be pushed into entrepreneurship by economic necessity rather than being pulled by opportunity. Social and cultural norms are also disadvantage women in the labor market and in their entrepreneurial ventures. And another challenge that we can notice it is also that women face challenges in accessing financial account and services than men. Moving on, the very last barrier on this work stream, the fifth barrier is that women have a low influence on government and private sector leadership. And although women's political participation is a human right, which is pivotal to sustainable development and economic growth, women are still facing obstruction in their political participation, and they are underrepresented not only in governments worldwide, but they are also underrepresented in the high level and senior management of many companies. Also, why is it important to have women in the government? It's important because research shows that women in elected office tend to focus more than men on critical issues such as education, welfare, food security, healthcare, and civil rights. And you can see a statistic that for me is very striking. Across 156 countries, which are covered by the World Economic Forum, which does every year a comprehensive report on the gender gap, you can see that women represent only 26% of 35,000 parliament seats. I don't know what you think about it, but I really think that this is a huge problem. And I'm Italian, and we are in the same situation. So it's not only an issue on developing countries. We can unfortunately see the issues in across world. And I'm done with the analysis of the barrier. We can do an analysis of the intervention. So if I'm not wrong, but Nandini, you can correct me here, the constraint that was highlighted in the poll was about market information and agency. So it's market constraint number 3.
Sorry, I was on mute. I think that's right. I actually didn't note them down. I was supposed to.
Yes, I did.
Okay, good. Then you know more than me. But you know, I did want to say, and this will come up a few times, I think, given the votes of people here. You know, I think the representation and agency issue is a big one, and we're also hoping, Giulia, that you'll run for office one day and tackle that one. Help to tackle that one.
I would love that. Let's see if it's possible.
Okay, please go ahead and let me. So I'll go to the third constraint. Yeah.
Yes, please.
And then you can talk about it. It starts here, and then I'll click to the next one.
Yes. Perfect. So we have many constraints as we just analyzed. We have intervention to address all these constraints in the playbook. Let me remind you that you can find information on the playbook in the chat. If you haven't received the link, just zoom me on Nandini privately, and we send you more information. The first intervention is about improving access to market information through apps and social networks. And in the playbook, you can see many examples of that. We did some work in Kenya, in Zambia, and then we have also some intervention done by other organizations. Then we have another intervention on leveraging relationship with agents, traders and brokers based on UNCDF work in Uganda. We have information on how to ensure that time and labor saving information and services are marketed in a way that are accessible for women. We have a lot of examples on investing in digital agriculture platform, as well as information on how to increase women's access to information through mentorship. That it's very relevant. We also focus in the playbook in how to create peer networks for women entrepreneurs to share information. So those are all the examples of the information related to the constraints that you highlighted. Let us know in the chat if you have questions. And once you're done, we can move on to the next session. I hope you are still with us.
Yeah, I'm still with you. I just wanted to see if there's any questions in the chat. I know we've been talking for some time now. The playbook link we've put in a few times, and we'll put it in again. We just wanted to check in to see if there are any questions on the things that we've talked about. The playbook was originally designed actually for UNCDF team members as something that I wish I had when I was leading our teamwork in Zambia, which is essentially using this sports analogy of what are all the plays, what are all the different kinds of interventions that we can try if women and girls are facing particular market constraints in our country. So we kind of created this for our in-house purposes, but then we were getting a lot of colleagues asking us, hey, will it be published? Is it something that other people can use? So this is one of the tools in our toolbook that we wanted to share, and then our colleagues at ADB asked us to share as well. So I don't see any questions in the chat. Giulia, I think we can put in the interactive link for the next question, and I'll also put it up on Mentimeter. Yeah.
I'm copying the link. Is the basic statistic on gender gaps, right?
Yep. That's the question, and the presentation has started. I'm going to share my screen as well. If you have any questions, yes, please go ahead and put them in the chat, but also just to make you, have it be a bit more interactive than just us talking at all of our colleagues in the audience. We wanted to at least have a little bit of your votes here. Do you know the basic statistics on the gender gap for mobile phone ownership, account ownership, and SME ownership in your country and region? Those for me feel like pretty basic statistics if you're going to work in this space. If you want to start thinking about the space, that's the first thing that I ask my colleagues when we start talking about what do they want to do to try to improve the digital economy, make it more inclusive for women in the countries that we work in. I say, well, let's start with the numbers, right? Let's start with understanding what that looks like. And in most countries, we do have those numbers. Findex, run by the World Bank, covers a lot of countries, has this data, at least the first two pieces. And then the Global Entrepreneurship Survey has that last piece for a lot of the countries. Not every country. And of course, our colleagues in the Pacific struggle sometimes with that global data, but sometimes they have their own data for research they've done. We have 10 votes so far. No is the big one, but a lot of people also saying some of them, they know some of them. Thank you, Orla, for the compliment on the playbook. It means a lot. It's a labor of love for me and Giulia and our team. So thank you for the compliment. Any more votes? We only have 10 votes. We're holding at 10 votes. I'm happy to keep the vote open for another 10 seconds, and then we'll close the vote in maybe 10 or 15 seconds. Giulia, what do you say? I'm surprised. I thought, given the diversity of people in our audience, I thought maybe more people might know those basic statistics. What do you think, Giulia?
You know, Nandini, that even in my case, now I was going through the question and I'm thinking that I know the statistics for some of the countries where I've worked, for example, Myanmar, but I don't actually know the statistics for my own country, Italy, or the country where I'm now, the US. So it's relevant even for me. I need to do more research probably.
That's a nice answer. Okay, we have 11 votes to no was the 11th vote. Interesting.
We have a question from Francesca in the chat. She asked, how long did it take for us to finish the playbook? I guess
a long time.
And I think a lot of work was not actually to write and compile the playbook, but was actually to do this real intervention. So to learn about, like, to implement all the programs in the country where UNCDF works, and then to be able to communicate the learnings.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the playbook maybe took 1.5 years to develop in total, with starts and stops. But like you said, Giulia, actually determining the common constraints with our colleagues didn't take that much time. There was a lot of agreement on what those common constraints are, which reflects in the voting, right? We had so many people say, oh, I want to vote for all of them. But when we came to the interventions and really researching, what interventions actually can address these market constraints, what actually has research behind it, it's very difficult. And many times we had to go back and say, maybe we need to remove a market constraint, or maybe we need to say we don't have an intervention to address some of these market constraints so far. And so that took a lot of time, Giulia. You're exactly right. Researching them, really knowing whether there was data behind them, and getting the best examples possible. That took a lot of time. Yeah. We have something else in chat. Nang is talking about, I think in Myanmar, the digital gender gap data we use is published in 2018. Yes, a lot has changed in Myanmar. That is true. I know that the GSMA also publishes their global mobile gender gap, and I think Myanmar has been a target country in the past. Giulia, if you don't mind throwing that in there in the chat, the 2020 report, I think that'll be useful to folks as well. And Orla might have just put that in at least she put their gender page in there already, but they've done, I think 18, 19, and 20, they've done reports and they're excellent, super helpful. And of course, Findex will be coming out, I think, next year as well. All right, so back to the sharing the presentation of our work and the playbook. So for now, Giulia, you're going to share with us a little bit about infrastructure, right? This is something that our colleagues have already talked about. So please go ahead.
Sure. Infrastructure is another very relevant work stream. And here we have 6 barriers. So the first one is barriers in identity documents ownership. Second one, lack of mobile phone ownership, as we were already discussing. The third barrier is the fact that women face obstacles in accessing internet. Then we have gender-based gaps in energy assets access. We have the gap that women face constraints in accessing digital financial services via agent network. And then finally, the lack of women-friendly digital payments. And if I have not wrong, from your poll, you mentioned that a constraint that you find very, very relevant is the lack of mobile phone ownership. So we will go through the interventions about that. But briefly, let me talk about the barriers. The first one, as just mentioned, is the fact that women face constraints in identity document ownership. We can move to the next slides, please. And IDs are fundamental because they give people the ability to do everything that requires proof of identity. Claim entitlements, inherit property, access financial services, among other things. And the gaps in registration and access to ID stems from a variety of factors, which are both cultural and legal. For example, complicated registration process, difficult to navigate, fees that some cannot afford to pay, and also constraints on time and mobility, particularly facing women and girls. And according to Women, Business and the Law, several countries, including in Asia and Asia Pacific, women cannot apply for a passport in the same way as a married man. And this is a critical challenge. And as you can see, we have a relevant statistics on the fact that 1 billion people around the globe face challenges in proving who they are. And among these, 81% live in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. So all of us, we have a lot of work to do on this constraint. Moving on the second barrier, as we just noticed, women have a lower level of mobile phone ownership. Globally, there are 26 countries for which male mobile phone ownership is substantially higher than that of women. And notably, the people who do not have a phone are disproportionately less educated, rural and female. According to GSMA, affordability was the primary barrier to mobile ownership, followed by literacy and digital skills. So all these constraints are interconnected, and the problem is that each constraint reinforces the other. So in addressing constraints to infrastructure, we really need to have an holistic approach. Safety and security was the third most important barrier noted by GSMA. We can move on now to the third barrier, which is very, very relevant as well. Women face obstacles in accessing internet. We really have to thank GSMA for all their excellent data collection, because a lot of data we got a lot of data from GSMA. In East Asia and the Pacific, the gender gap stands at 3%, which is you see the 3% and you are like, okay, then we are in the right track. But then you do more checks and you see the numbers. It means that 198 million of women do not use internet. And in East Asia specifically, the gap is 36%, meaning 372 million women. So this is very discouraging, and there is a lot of intervention that we need to apply to increase women's ability to access internet. And with regards to mobile internet, for both men and women, awareness of mobile internet is growing quickly, although it remains unequal. And women and men are increasingly seeing the internet as relevant to their lives. So this is a good news, I would say. And literacy and digital skills are the primary barrier to mobile internet use. So as just noted before, we have constraints that reinforced more constraints. Moving on to the fourth barrier, I hope you are still following. Sorry, I know I'm doing a lot of talk. Gender-based gaps in energy access are another relevant issues. And before we discuss about data, let me tell you that there are really here a lack of data and examples. So unfortunately, we are not even able to quantify how this constraint is really impacting women. We know that the energy sectors is one of the least gender diverse sectors, and closing the gender gap will be vital because women are obviously key drivers of innovation and inclusive solutions. And energy poverty is a worldwide phenomenon, which clearly has a strong gender dimension. For example, we can say that in developing countries, the lack of access to energy is an obstacle to both women and girls' well-being and economic opportunity, because it strongly affects their living condition, their time use, and it also undermines their both educational and economic opportunities. We move on to the barrier number 5. The barrier number 5 is about constraints accessing digital services via agent network. So the problem here is that worldwide female agents improve acquisition and retention of both female and male clients, and they tend to appeal more to women, who are half of the potential customer base. Women agents have proven to enhance customer service with higher activity rates than their male counterparts, and then normally they perform better. However, in many geographies around the world, including in Asia Pacific, most e-payment agents are male, and women sometimes report feeling uncomfortable to interact with men due to prevailing social norms regarding male-female interaction outside the home. For example, in India, women agents were found to be as profitable as men, proving as much or more service on average. And this is an information from AFI. So it's really important to increase the number of women agents, and this is relevant because more women agents will increase women's access to digital financial services. The last barrier is about lack of women-friendly digital payments. And the fact is that digital financial services can serve the purpose of advancing financial inclusion only when the population uses the service regularly. And the same is true for women's financial inclusion as an outcome of DFS usage. It is therefore necessary for women who have entered into the formal financial services to have a relevant use case to ensure a continued usage of financial services. And the problem is that why women do not have a regular use of digital financial services is due mainly to mobility constraints, convenience constraints, because digital payments often are very, very expensive. And then there is also an issue of safety and data protection that will be addressed later on. So here we have done with the analysis of the 6 main barriers, and I can move on the intervention, but actually let me ask if you have any questions on this barrier that we just analyzed.
There's one question from MJ Del Mundo, who was asking, when we are talking about the gender gap in energy access, what do we mean? Do we mean electricity? Do we mean fuel? And I gave an answer saying it usually means access to light and the ability to charge a phone at the most basic level. It's really access to power and electricity, less so fuel, but it does depend on how you kind of fuel your household needs as well. So it's a little bit complicated.
Yeah, and it's very pervasive also.
Yeah, but I mean, most of the time, even at that very, very basic level, there is a huge gender divide. And when we were researching this, and I researched this for other colleagues who want to sort of work in this space, the first thing is I want to understand is what's the gender gap in energy access. And actually, most countries don't have that data. If you're lucky at the country level, the local central statistics office may actually collect that data or not. Giulia, one person is asking, do you think it is worth to include climate resilience as an infrastructure barrier? Very interesting question. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I think this is very timely in this space because ADB is currently doing a lot of work on how climate change is overall the environment is impacting women's empowerment, not only economic empowerment, but also education, gender safety. So actually, we might reconsider thinking about another barrier to add to this work stream. Nandini, we need to write it down for the next edition of the playbook.
Agree. And we want the playbook to actually be a living document, right? Where people provide suggestions and they are considered on like a semi-annual or annual basis for updating the playbook. So this is a really great suggestion. I think it's so nice coming from, I think, this region, because as you said, I think this region in particular is quite impacted by climate change. And so the ability to be resilient to that as an infrastructure barrier is a really interesting idea. We have another comment from Wilma Rojas. Infrastructure is premised on the availability of reliable and stable internet service, which is often the case in rural areas. Not true, right? They don't always have that. And it actually affects women and men quite often. What do you think about that, Giulia? Your work in Myanmar, what do you think that means for our work in this space?
Oh, absolutely. For what I remember in Myanmar, I've done work in rural villages with UNCDF, and the internet connectivity was very, very problematic because the main internet providers, they tend to be concentrated in huge urban areas. And although when I moved to Myanmar in 2016, Myanmar was the 4th country in the world for mobile phone penetration. It was very, very high, but people had a phone and they couldn't use internet, especially in the rural area. So it's something that should be addressed in the same time. Like having a phone is not necessary. They also need to have a phone which is connected to internet.
Agree. And same thing when I was working in Zambia, which is not in the Asia region, but we actually had a very high mobile phone ownership rate, both across genders. However, as you started going, not even into the rural areas, but the semi-urban, peri-urban is what they called it, areas, they didn't always have connectivity. So having a service focused on a mobile phone, also had to improve that service in those areas. So thank you for asking that question, Wilma. It's a great question. I know we're running a little bit low on time, Giulia. Do you want to go through at least very quickly the market constraint that they voted on? And what was that? Was that phone ownership?
It was mobile phone ownership. I will do very quickly. And first of all, let me share that in our playbook, this is one of the topics that has the most intervention. So you can find many, many of them on the playbook. But let me, for example, share that we have intervention on how to increase third-party payment option for handsets from the government of Malaysia. Then we have a lot of information on increased assets financing option for handsets. We have interventions on how to increase the availability of pay-as-you-go phone payment plan schemes that is based on some work done in Malawi. We have intervention on how to create bundle products that include the handset tailored for women and girls. And this is some work done by Google and Orange in Africa. We have information on, we have intervention on how to include gatekeepers in engage boys and men in showing the business case for women and girls to own mobile service. And this is based on a report from Nike. And while concluding my presentation on this, let me tell you that every intervention should include a component on how to include men and boys. So this is very, very relevant for our work. We need when we design intervention, we need to be inclusive, not only target women, but also understand how to gain the support of men and boys. I am done with the infrastructure, and then I
want to just note in this also, since there's so many votes for it, I do think there's a great document from GSMA. It's the one that you see on the top here on accelerating affordable smartphone ownership. And actually, I think it's relevant for both smartphones and feature phones. And they have a lot of these interventions that are described here also there. And so I think that's one of the first places that I would suggest a person read if you're interested in this topic, and then look through these pieces. So I think, is it my turn next, Giulia? I think I'm going to be covering innovation. So what are the constraints to women's participation in the innovation work stream, right? So first constraint is digital and financial products don't meet the needs of women and girls. The second is limited access to finance, especially for women-led enterprises. Fourth is poor entrepreneurship skills connected to innovation. And lastly, women and girls often have poor access to digital business tools and digital platforms. The first barrier, often digital products are not meeting the needs of women, right? And I think there's this great visual on the left of what digital financial services often promise. And for those of us that are in this sector, we kind of have this very great confidence that this is what they promise. But often women who might be marginalized, who may not have access to a phone, they may be only entering the digital economy now. They perceive digital financial services differently, right? And this comes from IDEO.org. They have a great Women and Money project funded by the Gates Foundation that talks about this. So we see digital financial services as having security. They see it as an easy way for someone to commit fraud against them, right? We see it as safe for them because if they lose their phone, they still have their money. Often they see it as risky, like, well, I have my money with me, my cash. It's less risky if it's in cash than it is on the phone. They see it as, we see it as a way for them to control their money. They see it as inaccessible, right? Like if I have it in cash, I can spend it anytime. If I have money on my phone, then only a person who will accept money from a phone will work with me. So it's inaccessible to me. We see it as an opportunity for growth and a business for growth. They see it as intangible. What do you mean? I can't hold this. I don't know how this works. We may see it as giving them new options, right? Like in many countries, they're allowing, they have created lending products that are just based on your digital transaction history. And so we see it as a doorway for new products, while they may see it as new barriers. So it's important that these services are articulated, marketed, and actually designed to address women's needs, but also be sustainable. You can see that there are great gender gaps in account ownership by age and region in many countries, although in some parts of East Asia and the Pacific, especially for the younger folks, the gender gaps are less. Access to capital is a big challenge. The access to capital gap is large in East Asia and the Pacific. And often it's access to financial services, so just a basic account, or access to credit. And that's one of the biggest challenges for women entrepreneurs in the countries that we work in. And you can see that this is what the gender gap looks like across multiple countries. So it's not just Asia, but there is an average of a 15% gender gap in access to finance worldwide. So men are 15% more likely to have access to credit than women. Lack of women's actual engaging in innovation, right? So poor entrepreneurship skills connected to innovation. Often women entrepreneurs may not have applied for a patent, right? They may not be connected to digital finance and accept digital finance as a method of payment, or have a transaction history, or be connected to e-commerce. These are big challenges for women in their connection to that innovation workforce. And then lack of access to digital platforms. This is very specifically focused on digital business tools and digital platforms. Women are 20% less likely than men to have access to digital platforms. And this is something that we, UNCDF, are working on with several e-commerce platforms across Asia, in Bangladesh, Indonesia, Vietnam, and others. And one of their big questions to us is, how do we attract more women entrepreneurs? And we're working with them on their tracking systems. Are they tracking the gender of their vendors and their entrepreneurs that they work with? And then B, how do they recruit them? So those are two important elements of this barrier. So Giulia, can you remind me the barrier that everyone chose?
Yes, I think is participation in the workforce.
So it's the third one?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and some of that also comes from STEM, right? The science, technology, education, and math element of how many women are in those sectors: engineering, computer science, science, etc. Right? So there's a great paper on just generally women and digital literacy, but it also includes some of this elements, which is called "I'd Blush If I Could" by UNESCO out of the Equals Coalition. I think it's great. So there are several examples that we talk about, interventions that one can take either individually or together to try to address some of these issues, right? The first and most basic is providing technical assistance or offering capacity building to women and girls to build innovation skills in science, technology, and engineering and mathematics, right? STEM. And we have examples of these, and we have them in both developed and developing countries, and different different ways they've been able to do that. The second is around linking grants and technical assistance to both women and men entrepreneurs, but really applying a gender criteria in the assessment of which businesses can access the support. We did this in Zambia. They do this in the 2X challenge, which is a gender lens challenge that I think has attracted $13 billion to date, which basically says, hey, we have criteria. What businesses receive support from us actually depends on how do they support women, how many women are in their workforce, how many women are in their leadership. So all of these are linked in terms of grants, technical assistance, and lending. Third is to really focus on providing support to women networks in STEM and innovation industries. And there's a great example of the women entrepreneurs in Malaysia that do that. The fourth is building skills and access to services around data collection and analysis. This is a really important skill that most women entrepreneurs, most businesses, even reaching a small or a medium level, do not have, but can actually really catalyze growth for their businesses. So we have examples from the All Women Academy data science courses or marketplaces that help people hire people to do that data analysis for them, like Econolytics. Fifth is building skills around connection with agent networks for women entrepreneurs and skill buildings on artificial intelligence. I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to skip right into stream number 5, policy and regulation. There's 6 market constraints that we talked about. The first is around representation involving women at every stage of government decision-making process. And Giulia mentioned a lot of the statistics that kind of talk about what poor representation women usually have in many of the countries that we work in. In Asia Pacific, it's a mix, and you can see some of these numbers here. East Asia and the Pacific, it's actually 70%. So it's actually relatively high, but in South Asia, it's actually 33.8%, right? So depending on the country, that economic participation score really ranges, as well as that political empowerment score, which really speaks to how politically empowered are women in these regions and countries. The second is around policies and laws, right? At a very basic level, it's very important for laws to not be discriminatory against women and girls. In fact, a significant body of research links legal reforms aimed at achieving gender equality to women's economic outcomes. And in fact, a plug out to Giulia, you should put a link to this research that you did in Myanmar, which was legal and policy barriers to women's financial inclusion in Myanmar, that she did a couple of years ago with another colleague of ours, gives a great example of what that analysis can look like. And of course, we have the Women Business and Law report as well that gives great feedback on that. The third barrier, digital financial services, is one of the most important enablers for a digital economy. And looking and trying to create these 4 basic enablers through a gender lens is critically important. Allowing for non-bank e-money issuance, allowing for agents, ensuring that there's consumer protection, and ensuring that there's risk-based consumer due diligence. The fourth is around data, right? Most of the countries that we work in, there is no mandate from regulators to their financial service providers to collect and analyze sex disaggregated data. And even if that exists, sometimes our regulator colleagues do not always use that data to actually try to accelerate women's digital financial inclusion. So this is a really big piece that really can actually change things in a market if you actually know what sex disaggregated data looks like in a market around digital and financial inclusion. The fifth focus is on consumer protection mechanisms and really ensuring that they're designed in such a way that really can actually help address the risk that women see in financial and digital services. And so it's very important to try to have really strong consumer protections that find that balance between innovation and consumer protection. The last barrier that we got a lot of votes on, as I recall, is around making digital payments to vendors and participants of government programs, designing them in such a way that really create pathways to increased financial and digital inclusion for women. So Giulia, time check, I think we have only 5 minutes left. Is that right?
Yeah. And very, very quickly, the constraint that was highlighted, it's very dear to my heart, is about women's representation. If you want to
okay, women's representation is the constraint that everyone voted on, right?
Yeah.
So representation around involving women at every stage of government decision-making processes, including representatives from policymakers, regulators, and the private sector, is really, really important. We have several market constraints here, 5 here. First is really getting that gender assessment done on internal institutional policies and practices. We have a couple of tools here from the World Bank and UNCDF that can do that. Second is urging governments to establish internal targets, right? And a target sometimes is easier to manage than a quota, right? Saying, okay, in the first year, try this. In the second year, try this. So you have this kind of stepped approach that maybe is more reasonable and manageable for increased representation for women in leadership positions. And you have several examples of this from UNCDF that does a gender balance index for central banks, as well as India's constitutional amendment to reserve 1/3 of parliamentary seats for women. Third is around ensuring a pipeline of female talent is built. This is one of my favorite programs. The Women's World Banking has a wonderful leadership and diversity program, both for public sector stakeholders, mostly central bankers, as well as private sector. So I think this is a great way, or example of doing so. Fourth is supporting female representatives from financial service providers and women's organizations to directly participate in public consultation. And we have an example of this from UNCDF Sierra Leone. And just after this was published, we had an example of how we've done this in Central Africa. Lastly is requiring a minimum level of women's participation in all meetings, including speaking opportunities. And you can see Government of India's requirement for financial institutions to actually appoint female board members. So these are some examples of what we have here. I know we have a few questions in the chat as well, but I thought we could go to the last question. What do you think, Giulia?
Yes, let's do that.
Yeah? Okay, we're going to the last question. If you can put the link back in the chat, Giulia, for the last question. What's the most important indicator of agency? We talked about what agency and autonomy means earlier today. I gave you a hint that there was going to be a question about this in your country or region. Giulia's put the question in the chat. If you don't mind, please answer, and then we'll go to the final Q&A. We still have 25 people here, Giulia. Yes. They're still with us. They like, maybe they like what we're saying. I don't know. Thank you so much to our colleagues who've given us so many great compliments and questions. Yadam, thank you so much for your statement of enjoying this presentation. Wilma, you talked about government rules vary depending on country regulation on acquisition of SIM. In some countries, registration is required. You need to supply information, name, address, ID, but sex gender is not often required, like in Myanmar. In the Philippines, SIM purchase is unregulated. You can buy it anywhere and activate without filling up any information. Yes, that is true, Wilma. It does depend on what SIM registration looks like, but I will say that I've been seeing a trend of SIM registration in most countries requiring more information from government. So it'd be interesting to hear from everybody here if they're seeing that trend happening or if it looks different from them. We only have 6 people that have voted so far. Giulia, how can we encourage our colleagues to vote?
Please let us know. Please vote. Don't be shy. If you want to put your vote in the chat, that's also okay.
Yeah, if you're having trouble voting, let us know. We can vote for you. Orla, thank you so much for your kind words. Glad that you liked our presentation. Giulia, why don't you just quickly say, what do you think agency means for you?
Wow, it's a very, very long response.
No, but like in the context of the playbook, yeah.
I think it's very close to like having the awareness of what you can do as a woman and having the instruments to apply that awareness in practice. So know what you can do and being able to do what you want to do.
Yeah.
I don't know whether this is clear or it is too vague.
But I mean, actually, I think that's power within. But it's interesting because power within got 0 votes so far, you know. But we did say, what is the most important indicator of agency in your country, right? So for some people, it would be freedom of movement, right? For some people, that's manifested, that power within manifests itself into freedom of movement, freedom of violence, economic domain of agency, meaning, can I control the money that I earn? Can I be an entrepreneur? You know, is that allowed in my country as a woman? Can I be one? You know, freedom from violence is a very important one, and you know, it looks like a good number of people have voted for it. We only have 7 votes. I would just encourage you guys to click on the link and just give us your last vote, if you don't mind. MJ has had many realizations. That's interesting.
Wow.
MJ, you should share with us what those 1 or 2 of the realizations, if you want to, on chat. Madeline, thank you for joining us. Asuncion, thank you. I'm so glad that you joined. Well, I think we're wrapping up the session now. Thank you so much for your participation. This has been a lovely session with all of you. I'm going to really quickly just go to the last slide on our presentation. Thank you so much for everything you, all that you've shared with us. And if you have any questions or you want to be in touch, please let us know. Our contact information is below. And please, if you have found the playbook to be useful, let us know. If you have any suggestions on updating the playbook, like that climate resilience piece, as part of our infrastructure constraints, it's a great question. Please do let us know. And thank you so much for joining us in today's session. And thank you to our hosts, the ADB, for inviting us to share the playbook with all of you. And we invite you to continue the dialogue into the week, because I believe our ADB hosts have quite a bit planned into tomorrow and day after. So please do continue the great discussion on how to advance gender equality in our region, and looking forward to hearing all of your ideas in the future. With that, I think, Giulia, can we close?
Yes, I think so. Thank you very much, everyone.